I will never forget the sound the bag made when it hit the floor. It was a dull, heavy thud, as if my heart had slipped out of my chest and crashed against the ground. The candles inside snapped, the wine spilled, and the aroma of the freshly cooked stew mixed with the metallic smell of the building. In that moment, the world stopped, and so did I. I didn't scream. I didn't say a single word. I just looked. He was there in his office, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie hanging loosely around his neck, his head lowered over the skin of a woman who wasn't me. A young woman with loose hair and one of those smiles that never seemed to tire. The same smile that greeted me every morning from the reception desk. For a second, my body wanted to move, to run, to push the door open, to destroy everything in my path, but I didn't. Silence became my only shield. I stood frozen, watching that scene as if it didn't belong to me, as if I were watching a movie where I was nothing more than an extra with no lines. He didn't see me at first. He was too busy, too focused on his betrayal. When he finally looked up, our eyes met. His expression changed. First disbelief, then fear, then a clumsy mixture of guilt and anger. I stayed there with empty hands and tightly pressed lips. I don't remember closing the door. I don't remember leaving the building. I only remember the cold, a cold that didn't come from outside, but from within, from a place that had shattered beyond repair. I walked aimlessly through the dark streets, my steps trembling, my heart in pieces. The lights from shop windows reflected my shadow on the pavement, a shadow that looked older, more tired than ever. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears arrive only when the soul accepts what the eyes have seen, and mine still refused to. I thought of how many times I made dinner for him with love, how many nights I stayed awake watching the clock, believing his excuses, celebrating his hard work. I believed in his exhaustion, in his endless meetings, in his loyalty. And now all of that felt like a cruel joke told by fate. I stopped in front of a closed cafe, staring at my reflection in the glass. I didn't recognize myself. The woman on the other side had empty eyes, messy hair, the expression of someone who had just seen the truth without being ready for it. It was me, yes, but a version of me that would never be the same again. I remember the day I met Julian. I was barely 20, working as a secretary in a small company, and he was the new accountant. He had a clean smile, the kind of gaze you think you can trust your life with. And I did for 40 years. I fell in love with the way he walked, with his cautious nature, with his small promises. I'll bring you flowers tomorrow. I'll make breakfast on Sunday. I will never fail you. Simple words that, over time, became the foundation of my existence. We had a son together. We built a family. We shared fears, laughter, bills, and dreams. And yet there I was, 60 years later, with a broken soul, staring at the image of my husband holding another woman. My chest ached, not from anger, but from disbelief, from realizing that love, when extinguished, can pretend for years that you can sleep beside a stranger and not know it until it's too late. But before I continue, I want to invite you to something special. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps me know that you support me and enjoy my stories. And comment below telling me from which city you're watching. Now, let's continue. When I arrived home, the dinner was still in my hands, warm and broken inside the bag. I placed it on the table and sat in front of it. The silence was unbearable. Only the ticking of the clock filled the room, marking the seconds of a marriage that no longer existed. I thought of calling him, confronting him, screaming everything I had kept inside. But something stopped me. He didn't deserve my screams. He didn't deserve my tears. He didn't even deserve my voice. And it was in that moment, standing alone in the kitchen, with the smell of dinner mixing with the scent of betrayal, that I understood something that shook me to my core. I hadn't lost a husband. I had lost a lie. I stood up, walked to the hallway mirror, and looked at myself. I saw a tired woman, yes, but also a whole one. A woman who had given everything and still kept the most important thing of all, her dignity. That no one could take from me. I went to my bedroom, opened the wardrobe, and pulled out an old box where I kept letters, photos, and memories from our early years together. I laid them on the bed, one by one, and looked at them without crying. They didn't speak to me anymore. They didn't hurt. They were simply witnesses to a story that had ended long before I realized it. As I put everything away again, I paused at one photograph, him and me, young and smiling, the sea behind us. On the back, in my handwriting, was a line I had written long ago. We promised not to hurt each other. That night, I learned that promises don't break all at once. They erode slowly, until one day they mean nothing at all. I turned off the light and lay on my back staring at the ceiling. For the first time in 40 years, I slept alone but in peace. Because the truth, even when it hurts, sets you free. I don't remember crying that night. It's strange because part of me needed to, but the tears refused to come. My body was exhausted, yet my mind stayed awake, replaying the same images over and over. The same sounds, his murmurs, the muffled moans, the rustle of clothes falling to the floor. It was as if my head had become a locked room where the echo of betrayal kept striking the walls. I turned on the bedside lamp and checked the clock. 3:12 a.m. I hadn't slept a single minute. I sat up slowly, breathing deeply, as if each breath hurt. The silence in the house was heavy, as though everything, the walls, the paintings, even the clock, knew what had happened. The same clock I had watched for years as I waited for him. I put on a robe, went to the kitchen, and turned on the light. On the table was the torn bag with the remains of the dinner we never shared. The wine had stained the tablecloth, and the aroma of the stew had turned sour. It was the perfect portrait of my life, a feast prepared with love that ended in waste. I sat in front of that scene and thought about Julian, about the years I waited for him, the excuses I believed, meetings, work, demanding clients, he always said. And I foolishly believed him. Because when a woman loves, she becomes an expert at inventing excuses, so she doesn't have to see the truth. I remember the first time I noticed something strange. It was a few months ago. He had started paying more attention to his appearance, new colognes, neatly pressed suits, a rehearsed smile in the mirror. He said he wanted to maintain a good professional image, and I celebrated it. I even helped him choose his ties. I told him blue suited him because it reflected calmness. I never imagined the blue he wore wasn't for me. There was also a change in his tone, in the way he looked at me. Before, he looked at me like someone looks at a refuge. Later, like someone looks at a habit. And finally, like someone looks at something he no longer wants to see. But even then, I refused to admit it. Because when a woman clings to love, love becomes her most dangerous blindfold. I took a glass from the shelf and filled it with the remaining wine. It wasn't a toast, it was a farewell. I took a sip and felt the burn in my throat. On the radio, an old song was playing, one we used to listen to when we were young. If you leave me, it doesn't count, the lyrics said. I smiled bitterly. Destiny has a cruel sense of humor. I closed my eyes and remembered a time when everything was different, when Julian and I laughed at anything, when we walked along the boardwalk on Sundays and talked about the future, when money was scarce but hope filled everything. We were two young souls against the world, and we won. Or so I thought. We built a home, raised a child, paid debts, survived illnesses. I thought that would make us indestructible, but it didn't. Time doesn't destroy love. Indifference does. That dawn, while the city slept, I opened my old notebook, the one I used to write things I never said. Stories, thoughts, recipes, small confessions. I turned to a blank page and wrote with trembling handwriting. Something inside me died tonight. It wasn't love, it was my innocence. I stared at those words for a long time. They were simple, yet they freed me. Because by writing them, I understood that I wasn't a victim. I was a woman who had given everything, and now I had to decide what to do with the ruins. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the sunrise. The sky had a grayish tone beside it, like a half-painted canvas. The city lights were beginning to fade, and the first sounds of morning broke the silence. Everything looked the same. The world hadn't stopped because of my pain, and strangely, that gave me strength. At 7 a.m., I heard the door open. It was him. Julian walked into the house with the same routine as always, pretending nothing had happened. He took off his jacket, placed his briefcase on the chair, and greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Good morning, love," he said. "Good morning," I answered with a calm smile. He didn't ask about dinner, and I didn't ask about his meeting. We moved around the kitchen like two actors repeating a script we knew by heart. I served him coffee, passed him the sugar. He talked about traffic, about reports, about lifeless things. I listened attentively, but from far away. It felt as if there was an invisible wall between us, built out of lies. When he left, the house fell silent again, and that's when I cried. Not for what I had seen, but for what I would never feel again. That morning, I decided not to tell anyone, not my son, not my friends, not my sister. I kept the secret as someone keeps a sharpened knife deep in the chest. I knew the moment to use it would come, but not yet. Not now. Because I learned something while watching Julian that morning. When a traitor believes he is safe, that is when he is most vulnerable. And I was not going to react with rage. Rage burns out quickly. I wanted something that lasted, something he would remember. I spent the rest of the day in the workshop fixing an old curtain. The sound of the sewing machine calmed me. Stitch by stitch, the thread sliding beneath the needle reminded me that everything can be rebuilt, even the soul. The trick is not to rush, to sew with patience. That afternoon, as I put the fabrics away, I made myself a promise. I would not cry for Julian again. I would not waste one more day mourning something already rotten. I would watch. I would wait. And when the moment came, I would act. That night, as I lay down, I felt something different. Not peace. Not yet. But a tense calm, the kind that comes before a storm. I was no longer the naive woman who carried dinners in secret. I was a woman who had seen the truth. And even if it hurt, truth is the needle that stitches the broken pieces of the soul. I closed my eyes, and before falling asleep, I whispered a sentence that came from the deepest part of me. He doesn't know it yet, but he has already begun to lose me. And with that thought, I finally slept without fear. They say that when the soul is wounded, it seeks refuge in memories. And that's what I did. In the days that followed, my mind became an open album. Every smell, every corner, every silence led me back to a moment from the past. It was as if everything in the house spoke of him. The wall clock I had given him on our 20th anniversary, the armchair where he used to read on Sundays, the yellowed photos from our trip to the sea. Back when we still laughed without noticing time. I looked at all those memories and wondered at what exact moment we stopped being us. Was it an unspoken word, a broken promise, or simply the passing of years that wears down even the purest things when no one takes care of them? Julian had always been a serious man, responsible, methodical, the kind who planned every step. I admired him for that. His calmness made me feel safe. He was the one who knew how to fix everything. The one who made the decisions, the one who spoke little but always had the final word. And I, like a good wife, learned to stay quiet so I wouldn't contradict him. I watched him lead that way for years, convinced that loving also meant obeying. We met in a small office in a neighborhood where the noise of cars mixed with the smell of fresh bread and coffee from the nearby bakeries. He was the new accountant. I was the secretary. I still remember his first words to me. "Could you help me with these files, miss?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes held that mix of shyness and curiosity that disarmed me from the very first day. We started talking about work, then about books, then about dreams. I was 20, he was 28. He used to say he wanted to have his own company one day. I dreamed of opening a small sewing workshop. We fell in love without grand gestures, without drama, without hurry. It was a quiet kind of love, the kind that grows in silence until one day it fills everything. We got married 2 years later. I remember my dress, stitched by my own hands with scraps of fabric I bought in installments. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. That night, while we danced, he whispered in my ear, "You will never lack anything, Maria Pilar. I promise you." And I believed him. For a long time, he kept that promise. Our first years were happy, though humble. We worked side by side. He pushed himself at the office, and I, besides my job, handled the house, the bills, the meals, the little details he never noticed, but that kept everything running. I never complained, because for me, loving meant caring, supporting quietly. We had our son, Daniel, when I was 30. He was the greatest blessing of my life. Julian was happy at first, but over time his presence faded behind office hours, meetings, and trips. I was left in charge of everything: school, expenses, illnesses, homework. And even though his absence hurt, I justified it. I used to think he worked so hard for us. I never imagined that one day he would be working against us. There were moments when I felt completely invisible. I remember one in particular, our 30th anniversary. I spent the entire day preparing a special dinner, candles, music, and his favorite dessert. When he came home, he kissed me on the forehead and said he was too tired, that he preferred to go to bed early. He didn't look at me, didn't notice the hours I had spent cooking with excitement. That night, I ate alone at a perfectly set table, like an actress refusing to leave the stage even though the audience had already gone. I think that's where it all began. The distance, the silence, the routine disguised as stability. And without realizing it, I slowly faded, becoming a shadow in my own home. Not long ago, I found an old letter in the drawer of the wardrobe. It was from my mother, written shortly before she died. She said, "Daughter, love isn't proven by enduring everything. Sometimes loving also means having the courage to leave." I read it over and over as if the words were finally making sense. My mother was a strong woman, the kind who never complained, who faced pain with her head held high. I always wanted to be like her, but now I understood that I had mistaken strength for silence, that my way of loving had been too patient, too forgiving. And love, when given without limits, stops being love and becomes habit. I started observing Julian differently. I no longer saw the husband, but the man who was aging gracefully, who still cared about his appearance, who checked his phone carefully, who smiled that half smile whenever a message came in. And I realized that his infidelity wasn't recent. It was a habit, the natural result of years of disregard disguised as respect. But I didn't get angry. Anger blinds you, and I wanted to see. I wanted to understand what had brought me to that point, reduced to a silent spectator of my own marriage. The answer was simple and cruel. Me, for loving more than I should have, for giving more than I received, for getting used to waiting. That night, while ironing one of his shirts, I found myself looking at it with strange calm. It was white, spotless, smelling of expensive cologne. I folded it slowly and placed it in the closet. And as I did, something inside me shifted, a clear, quiet, powerful idea. I no longer wanted to win back his love. I wanted to win back my own. I began walking every morning, reading my old books, writing in my notebook. Every step, every word felt like a piece of my soul returning to its place. My friend said I looked different, calmer, stronger. And because I was no longer the woman who feared being alone. I was becoming the woman who enjoyed her own company. I still didn't know what I was going to do. I had no plan. But one thing was certain, my hands no longer trembled when I thought of Julian. His name no longer hurt. All that remained was the certainty that when love breaks, it is not repaired, it transforms. And that transformation, slow as it was, had already begun. In the weeks that followed, no one would have suspected a thing. I was the same as always, at least that's how it seemed. I prepared breakfast, folded the laundry, greeted him with a quiet smile. Julian continued with his routine. He left early, came home late, and avoided looking at me for more than a second. He didn't know that I already knew, and his ignorance became my greatest ally. I learned to use silence like a new kind of clothing, not a submissive silence, but one that watches, weighs, calculates. I discovered that when you remain silent with purpose, the world begins to speak. And little by little, Julian started revealing everything without even noticing. One morning, while I was making coffee, I heard him talking on the phone in the hallway. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I recognized the tone, sweet and nervous, the tone he once used with me when we were young. I froze, listening to his breathing between short sentences, and then he said it. "I promise this time, love. It won't be long." My hand tightened against the table. The sound of the coffee maker saved me from giving myself away. When he hung up, he walked into the kitchen wearing his perfectly rehearsed expression. I already had his cup ready. "Thanks, Pilar," he said without looking at me. You're welcome, I replied calmly. I didn't mention anything, not that time, nor the times that followed. I decided the best revenge was not catching him, but letting him believe he was still hiding something. I began observing him with new eyes. Every gesture, every word, every small mistake. I noted his schedules in a notebook, the days he left earlier, the nights he came home later, the messages that lit up his face before he deleted them seconds later. I became a patient spectator of his double life. One afternoon, while doing laundry, I found something. A hotel receipt folded inside the pocket of his pants. The name sounded familiar. Hotel Solarium, on the coast, an hour from the city. The date was recent, and the room was double. I smiled, not out of surprise, but out of confirmation. The truth hurts less when it finally reveals itself. I placed the receipt between the pages of my notebook, looked at it for a moment, and wrote beneath it. Lies don't need to be found. They fall on their own like dry leaves. During lunch, he mentioned a business trip for the weekend. His tone was normal, almost boring. I nodded the same way a mother listens to a child telling a clumsy lie. That's good, I said. A break from work will do you well. Yes, he answered, uneasy. It's just 2 days. Of course. Enjoy them. He looked at me for a second, trying to detect something, but I had become unreadable. The disguise of silence fit me perfectly. That night, I went to the study and turned on his computer. The password was still the same, our anniversary. 116882, what an irony. The man who forgot my birthday still used it as his password. I checked his emails. I found messages written in neutral language, no names, but with too many coincidences. See you Friday. Room 214. The wine you chose was perfect. Your blue shirt drove me crazy. My pulse didn't even tremble. I read everything without blinking. It felt like watching someone else's movie. The pain no longer tore me apart. It only made me stronger. Each sentence was another brick in the wall I was building between us. I saved the evidence on a flash drive. I didn't yet know what I would do with it, but I sensed the moment would come, and when it did, nothing would be impulsive. It would be precise, elegant, impossible to erase. On Friday, while he packed his suitcase, I pretended to check a grocery list. Will you take a suit or something more comfortable? I asked casually. A suit, of course. There are important meetings. Of course, I replied with a smile. Take care, Julian. You too, Pilar. He kissed my cheek, a mechanical, cold touch without a soul, and as I watched him leave, I knew it would be the last time I saw him walk out as my husband. I spent the weekend alone, in peace. No television, no phone, no pretending. I read my old journals, cooked for myself, and for the first time in years, I ate without watching the clock. I discovered that silence isn't always loneliness. Sometimes it's freedom in disguise. On Saturday night, I opened a bottle of wine and raised a glass to myself, to the woman who had endured so much and was still standing, to the woman who, without realizing it, was planning her own rebirth. On Sunday afternoon, he returned, feigning exhaustion. His hair smelled of an expensive perfume, one I hadn't used in years. How was your trip? I asked sweetly. Exhausting, but productive. I'm glad. I served him coffee. Did you eat well? Yes. The hotel had good food. I watched him as he spoke, nervous, avoiding my eyes. His face held tiny clues, skin slightly tanned, a faint scratch on his neck, an almost invisible lipstick stain on the cuff of his shirt. Details a man assumes a wife won't notice. But I noticed everything. You know, I said, meeting his gaze. I've always admired how hard you work. Thank you, he answered, confused. It must be exhausting carrying so much weight. What weight? He asked, forcing a smile. The weight of lies, I whispered, taking a sip of my coffee. His face tightened. I smiled, not to frighten him, but to remind him that silence can also be a threat. That night, while he slept, I stood over him for a moment. His face looked peaceful, unaware, innocent. How can someone sleep with such a filthy conscience? I wondered, and then I realized, not all sinners feel guilt. Some sleep well because they don't fear losing what they never valued. I turned off the light and went to bed. I wasn't afraid anymore. Only one truth remained. Patience is the most dangerous weapon in the hands of a betrayed woman, and I had learned to wield it. There are silences that wound more deeply than screams. Mine had started doing exactly that. For years, I had been invisible to Julian. Now, without saying a word, I began to fill every space. I didn't plan it. I simply stopped acting like the woman he took for granted. I no longer woke him with coffee in bed, no longer worried about his ties, no longer called when he was late or asked where he had been. And suddenly, I noticed something curious. My absence disturbed him more than my presence ever had. The man who once left the house without looking back now checked twice before closing the door. "Are you okay, Pilar?" he asked one night over dinner. "Of course," I answered without looking up. "You seem different." "Maybe I am." He fell silent. He had the eyes of a child who has broken something and doesn't know if his mother saw it happen. I watched him with a calm that disarmed him, because nothing terrifies a guilty man more than a victim who no longer looks like one. I began filling my time with things I had long abandoned. I went for walks, I painted, I listened to music, I wrote. I laughed for the first time in ages, and each laughter was an invisible blow to him. I could feel it in his discomfort. One Saturday morning, while he read the newspaper, I placed a sealed envelope on the table. "What's this?" he asked. "A document from the bank." "Which bank?" he asked. "Yours," I replied. He opened the envelope, confused. Inside was a copy of one of the transactions he had made from the company account. His face drained of color. "Where did you find this?" "In your drawer," I said calmly. "You shouldn't have." "Don't worry," I interrupted. "I'm not planning to report you." I looked him directly in the eyes. His breathing grew uneven. He tried to smile, but the smile cracked halfway. "Pilar, I can explain." "There's no need," I said, standing up. "I'm not interested in your explanations, Julian. Only in the consequences." He never mentioned the paper again, but from that day on, he stopped sleeping peacefully. At night, he pretended to read in the living room, but in reality, he was restless, walking back and forth, checking his phone in secret, speaking less and less. He started coming home earlier, too, perhaps afraid his double life was beginning to crumble. And the most interesting part was that he still didn't know exactly what I had discovered. That was what consumed him, the doubt. I kept the same serene tone, the same gentle words, the same gaze that no longer loved him, but studied him. One night, while he pretended to watch television, I sat beside him. "Julian," I said without hesitation, "do you think secrets always come out?" His body stiffened. He looked at me with caution, trying to guess how much I knew. "It depends on the secret," he answered. I didn't smile. Sooner or later, they all come to light. The next morning, I woke up early with a clear idea in mind. After months of observing, gathering proof, listening, connecting pieces, I was no longer a wounded woman. I was a strategist. I went to a law office where an old friend of my father still worked. His name was Don Samuel, an older man with a calm voice and kind eyes. "I need legal advice," I told him, and discretion. "Of course, Dona Pilar," he replied. "What is this about?" I pulled a folder from my bag. Inside were copies of Julian's financial movements, printed emails, and the hotel receipts. "This," I said. Don Samuel examined the documents slowly. "This is serious. Very serious. Your husband could face severe charges." "I know," I replied, "but I'm not ready to report him yet." "Then what would you like to do?" "I just want everything prepared for the moment I decide to." He looked at me with deep respect. "You are not seeking revenge, Dona Pilar. You are seeking justice." I smiled. Maybe both things are the same. That night, while I was cooking, he came up behind me. He hugged me awkwardly, as if trying to reclaim something that had vanished long ago. "I've been neglecting you," he said. "Yes," I answered flatly, "but I can change." "I don't doubt that." I turned to look him in the eyes. "The interesting part," I said softly, "is the direction in which you'll change." He stepped back, confused, unable to understand my words, because he still didn't know that his life, just as he knew it, was about to collapse. The following nights became a silent theater. I pretended to sleep, he pretended to work, but we both knew something was unfolding between us. An invisible crack growing day by day. slow but relentless. One Thursday, while putting away the clean laundry, I saw a message on his phone. Her name lit up on the screen. My love. The text read, I can't keep the secret anymore. If you don't tell her the truth, I will. I turned off the screen and left the phone exactly where it was. It wasn't the moment to intervene. Sometimes the best move is to let the enemy trip over their own feet. That night, I watched him as he slept. His face twitched, his breathing uneven. Perhaps he was dreaming of his own guilt. I wasn't dreaming, I was planning. The next morning, I waited for him with breakfast already served, just like I used to. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and he seemed relieved to see me calm. Are you in a better mood today? He asked. Much better, I answered with a smile. You know, Julian, I was thinking of organizing something special for us. Something special? Yes, a dinner to celebrate our anniversary. His eyes lit up with disbelief. Really? Of course, I said, taking his hand. It will be an unforgettable night. And it would be, though not for the reasons he imagined. When he left for work, I stayed alone in the kitchen. The clock struck 9. I looked at my reflection in the window. I was no longer the woman trembling behind a door after discovering betrayal. I was someone else now, firmer, quieter, more dangerous. The crack between us had grown so wide it could never be repaired. But inside that crack lay my strength, because sometimes the place where love breaks is exactly where freedom is born. I decided the anniversary dinner would be a tribute, but not to love. It would be a tribute to awakening, to this new version of me who had learned that sweetness, when carefully measured, can be more lethal than poison. I spent the next few days preparing everything with a serenity that could have fooled anyone. Julian seemed pleased. He moved around the house with that relieved air men have when they think the danger has passed. And that was exactly what I wanted him to feel. False peace. Trust. I told him I had reserved a hall at an elegant downtown restaurant, the same one where we celebrated our early anniversaries. I told him I had invited a few close friends and our son, Daniel. He smiled, slightly uncomfortable, but nodded. Thank you for this, Pilar, he told me one night. You don't know how much it means to me. I answered with a soft smile. Oh yes, Julian, I know exactly how much. During the day, while he was at the office, I organized every detail. The table, the flowers, the music, the wine, all carefully chosen. But under the table, there was something else. Inside a black box, I placed a small speaker. And in an elegant folder tucked inside my purse, I kept the documents, the transfers, the emails, the hotel receipts. My heart beat steadily, not with nerves, but with calm. It was the calm of someone who has already lost everything, and therefore fears nothing. I called Don Samuel, the lawyer, and asked him to attend the dinner as a family friend. He agreed without asking questions. He knew the night had a purpose. I also invited 2 of Julian's business partners, pretending it was a surprise for him. The irony made me smile. It would be a surprise, just not the pleasant kind. The day arrived. I spent the morning getting ready without hurry. From the back of my closet, I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in years, deep red, elegant with a modest neckline. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. There was something new in my eyes, a blend of strength, pride, and a spark long gone. When Julian saw me, he was left speechless. You look stunning, he said with a sincerity I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Thank you, I replied. You look ready for an unforgettable night yourself. We arrived at the restaurant just as the sun was setting. The hall was decorated with warm lights and soft music. The guests began to arrive one by one. Daniel, our son, walked up to me and hugged me warmly. Mom, everything looks beautiful. Thank you, son, I replied. I want a night to be special. When Julian greeted him, I noticed a subtle nervousness in his movements. He had always feared that our son would one day discover his double life. And tonight, that fear would finally come true. During dinner, everyone chatted happily. We toasted, laughed, remembered stories from the past. I listened carefully to every word Julian said. He spoke of success, of hard work, of family. And every sentence sounded to me like a hollow echo. Hypocrisy wrapped in silk. When dessert was served, I stood up with my glass in hand. I'd like to say a few words, I announced in a calm voice. The murmurs faded. All eyes turned to me. Julian smiled, unaware of what was coming. Today we celebrate many years together, I continued. Years of work, sacrifice, and love. Or at least that's what I believed for a long time. He looked at me with curiosity. I took a deep breath and added, "Tonight I don't want to toast to love, but to truth. Because without truth, no love can exist." With a discreet gesture, I pressed a small remote hidden in my purse, and then his voice filled the room. Through the speaker came his laughter, his breathless whispers, and the woman's voice beside him. It was a recording from one of their afternoons at the hotel. The entire room froze. Daniel turned pale. The business partners looked at each other, confused. And Julian collapsed into his chair, unable to produce a single word. I didn't look at him. I simply raised my glass. "To the men who forget that promises don't expire," I said calmly, "and to the women who learn not to cry for those who never deserve them." A murmur began to ripple through the room. Some guests stood awkwardly. Others shifted their gaze away. I kept speaking, my voice steady. For years I believed in a love that had turned into routine. Today I close that chapter, not with hatred, but with dignity. And I want everyone here to know that true strength isn't in holding together what is broken, but in having the courage to let it fall. I took the folder from my purse and placed it in front of him. "These are the documents for the accounts you hid, Julian." The partners recognized them instantly. "Copies are already in my lawyer's hands," I added. "I'm not reporting you out of revenge. I'm reporting you out of respect. Respect for myself." He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. "Pilar, don't say anything," I interrupted. "Words don't heal when they come after the damage." I turned to the guests with a serenity none of them expected. "Thank you for coming tonight. For me, this dinner isn't an ending. It's the beginning of my freedom." I set my glass on the table and walked toward the exit. I could feel the stares, the whispers, the shock. But I could also feel something stronger, lightness. The kind that arrives when you finally stop carrying a lie. Julian didn't follow me. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he finally understood that the woman he had betrayed for years was gone. Not from the house, but from his life. That night, I slept alone for the first time without sadness. The air felt different, the bed larger, the silence cleaner. I stared at the ceiling and smiled, not because I had won, but because I had awakened. And as the dawn filtered through the window, I understood that the most perfect revenge has no shouting and no tears, just an elegant closure and a peace the guilty will never know. I woke early. The sun was just beginning to slip through the curtains, painting the room in a golden shade. Almost ironic. It was the first sunrise after the dinner. After the end, the phone began to ring before 7. First a call, then another, and then another. I didn't answer. I knew perfectly well what was being said on the other end, by the partners, the employees, the mutual friends. The scandal had erupted. My silence had made more noise than any shout ever could. I made myself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was crisp, and for the first time in a long while, I breathed without the weight of his shadow. Julian didn't come back that night. I wasn't surprised. Cowards never know how to face the ruins they themselves create. Mid-morning, Daniel came to see me. He walked in without a greeting, his face serious. "Mom, did it have to be done that way?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I looked at him in silence. His eyes were the same as his father's when he was young. "Yes, son," I answered calmly. "It had to be done. But you humiliated him in front of everyone." "No," I said. "He humiliated himself the moment he decided to lie." I just turned on the light. Daniel froze. He didn't know whether to be angry or hug me. I understood his confusion. He had always believed his father was the picture of integrity, the perfect man. It would take time for him to digest the truth. "I didn't do this for revenge, Daniel." "Then why?" "For respect," I said, looking him in the eyes. "Because silence can also become complicity. And I've kept silent long enough." He remained quiet, processing my words. Finally, he sighed. "Dad lost control of the company. The partners removed him this morning." "I know. They also say she had doubts. The receptionist resigned." "I'm not surprised. Soulless stories always end the same way. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. It was Julian. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his shirt wrinkled. For the first time in years, he wasn't wearing a tie. The mask had fallen. "May I come in?" he asked, in a voice I barely recognized. I nodded. He entered slowly, as if afraid the house itself would reject him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Only the ticking of the clock filled the room. "I never thought you'd be capable of something like this," he finally said. "That's exactly what I thought about you," I replied. He lowered his gaze. "I've lost everything, Pilar." I didn't cross my arms. "You destroyed it yourself." He sat down in the chair, hands trembling. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "Start by not lying to yourself anymore." "That will give you peace," I said. "Peace?" he asked bitterly. I didn't answer. "It gives me freedom," I said. For a moment, I saw him as he used to be, the man I loved, the one who made me laugh, who spoke to me of dreams. But that version of him no longer existed. He had died somewhere in a cheap hotel, lost among his lies and someone else's perfume. He stood up and looked at me with weary eyes. "Will we ever be able to forgive each other?" he asked. "I already have," I said. "Truly, yes. But forgiving doesn't mean going back. Forgiveness cleanses the soul, not the past." He didn't insist further. He left the house quietly. I watched him walk down the street, hunched, older than ever. He was a defeated man, not just because of me, but because of his own conscience. And for the first time, I felt not pity, but compassion. A subtle difference, yet enormous. That afternoon, I threw open all the windows. The wind swept through the house, stirring the curtains and carrying away the stale air he had left behind. I went room by room, packing his things into boxes, not in anger, but with serenity. Love had gone, but respect for myself had returned. I found his watch on the nightstand, the same one I had given him on our 10th wedding anniversary. I stared at it for a few seconds. The hands were still moving, as if nothing had happened. Time stops for no one, not even for betrayed love. I left it on the bed with a note. "Time is the only thing that cannot be recovered, and I will not waste another second." That night, I slept deeply. The silence was different. It didn't hurt. It felt as if the entire house was breathing with me. For the first time, I dreamed not of him, nor of what had been, but of myself walking barefoot on the beach, the wind on my face, my hands free. When I woke, I knew exactly what I had to do. I went to the bank, withdrew my share from the joint account, and started the process of selling the house. I didn't need that place full of echoes. I wanted to start somewhere new, where every corner wouldn't remind me of what no longer existed. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Julian. I read it slowly. He wrote that he was leaving the city, that he needed to rebuild his life. At the end, he added, "I hope someday you can remember me without hatred." I smiled, a bittersweet smile. I never hated him. Hatred chains you, and I no longer wanted chains. I just wanted to live. I folded the letter and placed it in a box with the memories of the past, not to keep him, but to remind myself of what I will never allow again. That night, I went for a walk alone. The sky was clear. The city lights reflected in the puddles from the rain the day before. With every step I took, I moved farther from the woman I had been and closer to the one who was being born. Because yes, even at 60, one can be reborn. As the wind brushed my face, I paused for a moment and whispered, "There is no greater fall than that of pride, and no greater victory than rising without hatred." That phrase stayed with me like a mantra, like a promise. The fall was not only his, it was mine too, but I chose to fall standing. Months have passed since that night. The dinner, the fall, the silence afterward, and I am still amazed at the calm with which it all ended. No shouting, no blows, no belated tears. Sometimes justice arrives as silence, and it is stronger than any sentence. I sold the house, the same house where I laughed, cooked, and cried quietly so many times. I didn't feel sadness handing the keys to the new owner, only relief. The past no longer held power over me. It was like closing a door without looking back. With the money, I opened a small cafe by the sea in a quiet town. I called it the Lighthouse because that's what I wanted to be now, a light for anyone who felt lost. Every morning, I open the windows, turn on the warm lights, and smell the freshly baked bread. Sometimes, customers ask why a woman my age decided to start over. I smile and say, it's never too late to choose yourself again. At first, living alone felt strange. After so many years sharing a roof with someone, the silence seemed vast, but over time I understood that the silence wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space for me, for my thoughts, for my peace. I reclaimed simple things I had forgotten. Reading aloud, singing while I clean, dancing barefoot when no one is watching. Sometimes, while sweeping the cafe floor, I catch myself smiling for no reason and wonder how I spent so long without it. One day, while organizing a box of my things, I found something that stopped me. Wrapped in old paper was my wedding dress. I touched it with trembling hands. The lace, though yellowed with age, was still soft. For a moment, a pang of nostalgia pierced my chest. I remembered the young woman who had sewn it with hope, who believed in eternal promises. That young woman was me, but she also wasn't. I sat by the sea with the dress on my lap. The wind moved it gently, as if trying to take it away. I looked at it for a long time and thought of everything I had lived through since wearing it. Love, betrayal, pain, the fall, and how, after all that, I was still here. I closed my eyes and whispered this was not a loss. It was my rebirth. Sometimes women come to the cafe alone, their eyes tired. They sit, order tea, stare at the sea, and sigh. I watch them and recognize in them the same sadness I once carried. I approach, smile, and say, sometimes life breaks only to show us we are stronger than we thought. Their eyes glisten because women who have loved too much always recognize each other. We share the same wound, but also the same capacity to heal. One Sunday afternoon, my son Daniel came to visit. He brought flowers and a sincere smile. Mom, he said, you look happy. I am, I replied. Don't you know how much I admire you for everything you've done, son? I took his hand. Don't admire me, just learn. Never let love make you lose yourself. He remained silent, his expression tender and respectful, filling my heart. He was my son, but also the man who, hopefully, would not repeat his father's mistakes. That night, I closed the cafe early and walked along the beach. The sea was calm, and the moon lit the shore like an ancient lantern. Each step in the sand was both a farewell and a welcome. I thought of Julian. I knew from Daniel that he had left the city, living alone, trying to rebuild his life. I felt no resentment, no sadness, only gratitude, because without his betrayal, I would never have discovered my own strength. I paused at the water's edge, letting the waves touch my feet, and whispered, thank you, Julian, for breaking me, because only then did I learn to rebuild myself. The wind carried my words out to sea, along with the last remnants of my past. I returned home and stored the wedding dress in a drawer at the cafe, where I also keep my recipes and little writings. Sometimes I look at it and smile, not with nostalgia, but with affection. It is the symbol of a story that no longer hurts. The reminder that a woman can lose everything and still rise again. I lit a candle by the window, as I do every night, not out of faith, but out of habit. The flame flickered gently, its reflection painting the glass. There, in that reflection, I saw myself differently, serene, strong, alive. I realized I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the woman who survived her own story. And as the clock struck midnight, I smiled. There were no shadows, no fears, no guilt, only a luminous certainty in my chest. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes direction and returns to where it always belonged, within oneself. And that was my story.